Hey guys, Blake here. This is an interview with Clint Smith, taken from our post-budget live stream along with Paul the other one recently. I hope you enjoy.
Hello there, kia ora. Welcome to this post-budget special. I'm joined again by Blake and the brilliant Clint Smith, the numbers man himself. First of all, how are you holding up there, Clint? You've gone through everything, headache subsided, stop crying in the corner.
Well, it's a lot to digest, but I think I've got my head around the budget now. Yeah, so
With the announcement yesterday, announcements, was there anything that sort of jumped out at you as being a surprise?
I think in some ways I was surprised that they did exactly the tax cuts that had been presaged before the election. So that was interesting, but essentially we always knew it was going to be a bit of a meh. It was going to be $10, $15, $20 a week, $2 for a lot of people, and actually, it doesn't solve the cost of living crisis. It doesn't change the world. On the cut side, they kind of did what you would do if you had to make cuts and you didn't want to make too many headlines, which is do small, widespread cuts rather than big programs. By and large, although there are some programs that are gone that I think are going to generate some headlines.
Such as?
Well, in the disability sector, the minimum wage subsidy gone. In the disability sector, and certainly in the workers' rights side of the left, this has been a huge issue for a long time, that disabled people were allowed to be unemployed at below the minimum wage for exempt employers. And Labour last year finally, said, no, we're going to fix this, and we're going to subsidise those employers, but make sure that the disabled person is getting the actual minimum wage, the same as anyone else. And to see that reversed, taking out, I think, about $50 million, which ultimately is $50 million, ultimately actually comes out of disabled people's pockets. And that money is, financing the tax package. So, that, I think that's quite a disappointment. So something that I think speaks to values that don't align with mine.
Yeah, that's a great segue, actually, Clint, for you to set up for me. So that's good. So $1.9 billion supposedly going into disability. So it sounds good in retrospect, but when you look at it, it's not actually that great, because even though it's welcome, most of it goes into probably buildings, which to 99.8% of us in the community, including myself, could be good, but at the same time, it's not actually that great, because it doesn't really help with any of the other issues that we have been advocating for, as you might have seen on my socials and stuff like that.
Yeah. I should disclose I do some work with the Disability Support Network, just providing them with some advice, and we've been really making the case strongly to government that those providers need enough money to keep up with the growing demand and the growing complexity of demand and raising costs. And we calculated that they would need about what they've got just to keep the lights on. So it sounds like a lot of money, but actually it's just shooting water for those organizations which are already doing it pretty tough. And as you say, it doesn't address wider issues for the disabled community, access issues, housing issues, all those kind of things. And it also doesn't address the pay equity for the care and support workers, which we know is an ongoing thing. A lot of those workers are, seeing their wages fall in real terms. They're barely minimum wage now, and they're owed a lot. there should be a fair deal for them, and the government needs to come to the party because ultimately they're the ones who fund that system. But it will cost a decent chunk of change, and the government just doesn't seem to view that as a priority.
As I've said in many of my videos, like, the thing that I find most astonishing is that, like, the ministers themselves have connection to the disabled community, and I don't want to sound, like, oh, all left, but they don't seem to care. They don't seem to be bothered. And I find that utterly astonishing. By the way, cheap plug, my petition will be delivered on June 26th. For those people at the moment.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of hope around Penny Simmons as Minister for disability issues, given her lived experience with it. Obviously, she made a hash of things earlier in the year and was pretty quickly moved on by Luxon out of the role. I think Louise Upston, we've already seen she was the one who brought through the disability cuts earlier. The benefit changes earlier this year, which have resulted in lower benefits. And I think she's going to take a pretty hard-nosed attitude. She talks a lot about the sustainability of the sector, which means money, too much money. And well, where does that money going to at the end of the day? What are you going to cut? It's not going to be good for disabled people, that's for sure.
I was just wondering, was there anything in the budget that you actually liked?
I was glad to see that disability support services at least got enough to meet the cost pressures. I was concerned it wouldn't be enough. Other sectors certainly didn't get enough. Apart from that, there's some bits I was sort of worried were going to go. I thought they might get rid of the Warmer Kiwi Homes program entirely. They've cut it back, but at least it's still there to a degree. I guess the things not been as bad as I feared in a few places is where it's at for me. The prescription charges back on. I think this is a terrible policy, but I was concerned that they'd actually increase them because that's what Treasury's been recommending for years, that it should be $10 per prescription, not $5, that kind of thing. So I think what they've done is kind of spread the cuts and spread the pain quite broadly so that people aren't going to immediately feel that. But what you'll find over time is considered a degradation of the system. Certainly what happened under the last national government was the health system didn't go to pot in year one, but after 5 years of not getting enough money, that's when it starts to really become a crisis.
It's when you start to notice the mold growing on the walls at Middlemore.
Yeah, exactly right.
One of the things that jumped out for me is just a weird little line in there, was actually the tax take from tobacco imports. It seems to me like the number decreasing, I kind of understand if the number of people smoking is dropping. But when you look at things like the alcohol tax import sort of revenue, that's on the increase, and you'd think that drop in numbers of people drinking would have the same effect. So is there something there that am I seeing something there that's not there, or does that imply that there are changes around excise tax and how they work for those kind of products, which has always kind of been a slam dunk for any government in terms of revenue gathering?
Yeah, I mean they are putting up tobacco excise. I mean, I think it's been going up at 10% a year for a long time now. Cigarettes are actually very expensive now. So few people smoke that people don't realize, but they're very expensive. I think that what Treasury will be saying is, yeah, we're going to keep on putting up the excise, but we also think that smoking rates are going to decrease. Obviously not by as much as they would have under the previous policies, but they sit down and do their models and try and get as close as they can. On alcohol, alcohol consumption is falling, but per person, but not by as much. I think total alcohol consumption across the population is relatively flat, whereas tobacco use is falling.
That makes sense. Yeah, not being a numbers person, I'm just going, that looks like a really sharp drop.
Yeah.
Anything else you liked from this budget, Clint?
Well, I was worried that the unemployment numbers projections were going to be worse. It's
They're not great projections, though.
No, they're not. 5.3% is not good, and it means another 30,000 people out of work by the middle of next year. And at the same time as they're saying, well, we're going to clamp down on the number of people on the benefit. Well, who falls in the gap then, right? There's more people out of work, but we don't want so many people getting the dole. So someone falls between those two stools, right? But they're still. I mean, I was worried we were going to see it more like 6% or worse. So some of those projections are a little bit better than I feared. I guess the question now is, this is kind of the apex of this government's agenda. All we ever heard was we're going to fix the cost of living crisis up to $250 a fortnight. Of course, nobody gets that $250. There's a bit of a mirage. Fix the cost of living crisis, tax cuts. Now that's done. Now we get our $2 or our $10 or our $20. What's the actual plan now? Well, this isn't going to grow the economy. This is just a shuffling of some money around in a very small way. There's nothing to boost production, nothing to create jobs here. So I think that's the question for this government going forward is what next? Is this it?
The thing that really got me was what I took away from the budget is those cancer things that they've been promoting for months just seem to be nowhere. Just seem to be onto that burner.
Yeah.
No talk about it. What happened?
Yeah. And I think, it's obviously like it's a strange values decision because they could have just delayed the landlord tax cuts by a few months to pay for that. They didn't even have to cancel them. They could have just delayed them. So there's a strange values thing. I also think it's strange politics because they made such a song and dance of that policy. They got so many people's hopes up. Why not just do it? It's not going to break the bank. They had like I say, they could have delayed the landlord tax cuts by 4 months, and that would have paid for those cancer drugs. But they chose not to, and I think that's a strange decision morally, and I think it's a strange decision politically.
Well, when you take a look through the budget, is there anything that you sit there and go, well, this is quite clearly driven by ACT, or quite clearly driven by National, or quite clearly driven by New Zealand First? Is there sort of a shape in there that tells you what their priorities were going into the budget negotiations?
Yeah, New Zealand First is very much out to get the money for the stuff they care about. It's quite sort of narrowly focused. So no cut to foreign affairs funding once Peters is Minister of Foreign Affairs, and getting that money for the Regional Growth Fund, Shane Jones's latest growth fund. So, yeah, they very much got their priorities. ACT would have liked to see much deeper cuts, and it's come out this morning that they proposed a much more expensive tax cut package that would have been funded by much deeper cuts. So ACT didn't really get their way on this. I think you're seeing instead that Luxon's going, here's some money for charter schools. Here's some money for your Māori wards referendum. That kind of ACT has been getting smaller things rather than the big transformations that they hope for.
Is it one of those things then with at the precarious situation that the coalition's in at the best of times because there's so many people involved with it. Do you think this is something that the parties are sort of squared and going, yep, this is what we're going to deal with, so that's fine? Or do you think it might cause some tension along the lines of, Winston didn't get his stuff cut, so why is my stuff not being paid that much attention?
Yeah, the situation like this, a three-way government where each party effectively has the veto because you need each of them to make a majority, it is inherently a very dynamic and complicated situation. And when Jacinda Ardern had the same situation in 2017, she used her personal relationships. She had a very good personal relationship with Winston Peters, and the Greens' willingness to make things work really well to keep it all above board. This government seems much more fractious. That they seem to come into conflict publicly quite a bit more than under Ardern. So I guess every decision is a negotiation because you need them every time, and even if you try to say, okay, you get this thing, they get this thing, you're still depending on both parties and National going to each decision going, yes, okay, I'll do that. And that can build up, right? Like, I think once Winston is no longer Deputy Prime Minister and he's looking towards the next election and how he's going to market himself as the champion of the little guy and the truth speaker, that's when things will start to be interesting. And also if there's any move to privatise public assets, such as there's a lot of talk about KiwiBank at the moment, or the ferries, those kind of things. Peters is meant to be quite strongly anti-privatisation. He, walked away from the Shipley government in '98 over privatisation of public assets. So that's something where you could see that consensus and that very delicate balance now of having to get everyone on board for every decision. It could start to break down.
On current polling, we have seen that he may not even make it back into government whenever this election does occur. So that's a worrying sign for Mr. Peters. If I could ask you the generic question that I've been asking or a majority of our guests this week. So I've been watching a lot of the galas and awards that Mr. Luxon has been attending, and he seemed to get quite a cold reception whenever he appears on stage. But as soon as he mentions the opposition, they get a big ovation, and he has to awkwardly acknowledge them and say, "Oh yeah, let's cheer for them too," and all that kind of thing. So, how worrisome is that so early in a government term, in your opinion?
Yeah, if I was sitting there as a National Party strategist, that would worry me, because you're meant to get a boost when you come into government. That the public has just kicked out a government they didn't want anymore. They've got you instead. They're meant to be happy with that decision, and it's evident that that's not really the case. And yeah, some of that public reaction to Luxon's quite interesting. It's a bit almost like, Trump never got a honeymoon when he became president, right? He'd beaten Hillary just and by dint of their system, but he never sort of got that boost. I think Luxon's kind of in the same thing, and I think Luxon clearly really enjoys the stuff about the office of Prime Minister. He really enjoys the photos of him going on to the Air Force planes and going off and having the pictures with the other world leaders and all those kind of things. And I think he kind of
was it Eden Park this morning with the national banners everywhere and
yeah. And I kind of think he expected that he would get more adoration for the office he holds. But it's not really how it is. It is whether what you're personally delivering, whether people like you or not. So, yeah, it's not the position you want to be in. If you're a national strategist, you'll say no. This is not a comfortable position to be in 6 months into our first term.
Yeah, but the fact that the ovations are getting around it is so bad. The only thing I could compare it to is like Sunak in the UK at the moment. He's having the same sort of issue.
Yeah, and like Sunak is at what? He's the 5th Tory Prime Minister, of a 14-year government. Like, he's at the diseased end of a government that's time to die. This shouldn't be the position that a new Prime Minister finds himself in. And this, goes back to the thing that like it was Labour kind of lost the election rather than people saying, yeah, we love the vision that Luxon is putting forward. He was never that personally popular. And it's kind of on Labour also to find what are they going to offer that's going to be a positive alternative if they want to win in 26. Because this government does look very beatable, but Labour will have to get their act together to present an alternative to win back those votes. And there's not too many that they need, but they do need to win back that centre.
Do you think that a lot of the voters that had whipped over they seemingly have regretted their move?
I mean, I think that's what the polling shows, right? Like the fact that the government's polling is deteriorating this early in the cycle shows that people aren't getting what they expected, and this goes back to tax cuts. Labour people out on the campaign trail in last year would have been saying, look, I vote Labour normally, but cost of living's high. This guy's going to give me $250. I got to vote for him. And, well, turns out it wasn't $250, was it? That was all a bit of a con. And so, people are seeing that now, and they're also just all the other stuff the government's doing that no one expected. The tobacco changes, the anti-climate change stuff, the mining public land, the anti-Māori rhetoric, the disability stuff, that no one voted for that. And so you kind of step outside the expectations of voters, and they do say, oh, this is actually what I wanted.
I believe Labour's in the process at the moment of going back to the board in terms of what they're looking at offering for the next election in terms of taxes and policies and stuff like that, the rebuild process which happens after any election. How does an event like yesterday's announcements with the budget impact that decision-making process?
It does sort of set the, I guess, the fiscal parameters that you have. When you're a major party, you do have to be able to get up and say, we can afford the policy proposals that we're going forward as a whole. If you're a minor party, you can put up quite a few proposals and say, look, we're not going to get all of them, so it doesn't need to add up as a whole package. But so Labour will be looking at those forward fiscal projections and saying, okay, this is how much money we're going to have. Do we need to get more revenue to afford the investments and the policies that we think are important? If so, where do we get that revenue from? And what's the debt situation? Is it too high? Too low? I think it's quite important that Labour doesn't get into the mistake of framing debt as the problem. Borrowing for tax cuts, blah blah blah, kind of implies that there's not enough money to go around, and that then says, oh, yeah, we do have to cut back spending because there's too much debt. Actually, the problem isn't the debt; it's that they chose to do this massive tax cut package that, apart from landlords, people get very little from. And as a result, they are cutting back on public services. That should be the choice should be irresponsible tax cuts for landlords versus public services, not debt versus tax cuts.
So, if you were Mr. Hipkins, would you keep pushing the narrative that you're giving too much money to the landlords?
Yeah, absolutely. It is just like outrageous. $3 billion. It's so much money to such a small group who are already wealthy, and that money has to come from somewhere, and it's come out of disability services. It's come out of prescription charges. It's come out of putting up public fares. It's why there's so little extra money for health and education, and it's not good economic policy because you're incentivizing people to invest in the non-productive economy and spend their money bidding up the price of houses against each other rather than invest into the productive economy. So it's a terrible policy all around. And the good thing politically about it is that it's a non-entity. When you propose a new tax, you get what I call the sum of all fears problem. No one, especially if it's kind of vague, no one really knows if it's going to apply to them. Am I going to be paying new tax? How much more tax am I going to pay? If Labor says, look, we're going to restore the removal of interest deductibility for landlords, it was we know that was what used to be there, and it raises money straight away as well. Whereas some of these tax proposals, you don't actually get any money into the government coffers for 5-10 years, and so I would be keeping on that the landlord tax cuts were a mistake on all those grounds.
Is it a little bit of a shell game though when it comes to borrowing with this budget? We're not borrowing for tax cuts, we're borrowing for operational costs, but we're doing these tax cuts which are a large in terms of value that we're looking in what we're borrowing. Is it a shell game? Is, again, not an economist, don't know, but it feels like that to somebody from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, the tax cut package costs $15 billion, right? So you could go, well, rather than do that tax cut package, we are going to spend $15 billion more on public services, or we're going to have $15 billion less debt, or a combination of those things. I just think that emphasizing debt too much then says that the spending cuts are okay. Because it's all a question of priorities. What is the top priority for that $15 billion? The government said the top priority for that $15 billion is tax cuts, and with a large chunk of that to landlords. I would say the priority for that money is public services, and others might say the priority is less debt, but then they're accepting that public service cuts are a lower priority, and I don't agree.
Oh, I was just going to say, what are you going to do now that it's over? Is it sort of like after a Marvel movie comes over and you watch it and you're like, oh, okay, now what do I do? What do I do?
I'm just getting ready for my $20 a week. I'm just so excited for my $20 a week tax cut. I'm just, giddy.
You mean you're not getting the $250 that everyone was promised?
So, thanks for joining us, Clint. Thank you for watching. Well, that's another video done. If you want to see more videos, you can find them over here, or above my head, or around here. Until then, see you on the next one.